I'm Joe Screbbles, and I'm joined by Matt Purslow.
Hello.
He said hello. And Matt here has just played Warhammer 40,000 Darktide. Matt, we know this comes from the company Fat Shark that made Vermintide, the Warhammer fantasy, Left 4 Dead-alike. How close are we talking to that? Is this just a sci-fi Vermintide?
I think you'd maybe expect that it would just be Vermintide with guns, which would therefore make it maybe a bit closer to Left 4 Dead. But I was really pleased to find out that it's much more of a hybrid between those two games. And I guess it actually draws from the Warhammer source material in that basically it almost feels like it's split up into shooting phases and melee phases, and that's based on the way that you're pushed around by the enemies in the game. Obviously there were ranged enemies in Vermintide, but because they were firing things occasionally cannons, but mostly arrows or throwing knives and stuff like that, that meant you could close that distance very easily. Darktide's just not that, because they've got laser guns, they're using las guns to fire at you, so it becomes very, very difficult to kind of move up the field. So that's where your range comes into contact. But then obviously it's a horde game, right? So you've got an awful lot of kind of poxwalker zombies coming at you. And so it's very much about learning to keep those guys at range, because if you get into melee, they'll mob you. But the people that have got guns, you want to find a way to cut through that range and take them down with your chainsword or your big knife, something that they're not very good against.
So is it almost like rock, paper, scissors design in that way?
Yeah, there's definitely a little bit of that, which I also think comes from the tabletop sort of version of those kind of characters. You are very much looking at, if they've got las guns, it's kind of they don't really have the melee power, but it's a lot more difficult to get to them because it's a relatively rapid fire weapon and you have very little health. Much like Vermintide, you are kind of close to death for a lot of it. There's a lot of that kind of tension, a lot of that near-death experience whilst trying to do fairly complex objectives.
I was going to ask about the objectives. It's not as simple as just walking through a map and taking out enemies, right? There are missions to complete on the way.
Yeah, so for example, the one that we were doing required you to effectively kind of hack into, I guess for a lack of a better description, a mainframe. Obviously you are literally using skulls to do this that have got weird computer brains in, but that required you to monitor kind of several of those that were going on whilst you were being mobbed by enemies. And if those broke down, it wasn't just a case of going over and tapping kind of X to get them back up. You literally had to get out a mini Auspex computer and sort of redial in, recalibrate the computer with a small mini game. That, yes, very, very simple. It was literally just tap when you see the light come on. But when that's been done under pressure, when you've got zombies coming in from all over the place, you've got chaos demons that you can hear channeling down the tunnels, that kind of adds the right amount of pressure, I think.
There is plenty more to see from Warhammer 40,000 Darktide. I hope that is a nice taste of what's coming from it. And we've got so much more coming from Gamescom as well. Keep it locked to IGN. We've got stuff for you all week.